sir.
All right, thank you.
Yes, sir.
I'm not sure this is the right one. Let's see something. This. Good. Good. Okay, we're going to begin our class by going to God in prayer. Father in heaven, we pray your blessing upon our class. May open our understanding to grasp new ideas and help us, dear Father, to become better and better in whatever we're studying for your glory and honor in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, as I call your name, let me know that you're present. Israel.
Present, sir. Present.
Solin.
Present, sir.
Wood.
Present, sir.
Roy.
I'm here, sir.
Hooper. Okay. Now, based upon the answers that were given to the test last week, I've decided to go back over the lesson and address some of the misunderstanding that was demonstrated in the answers given, some of the answers given. So our general objectives are to examine the syllables of a word that may take an accent. 2, to examine the syllable of a word where an accent usually is. 3, to examine the symbol of an accent when it occurs where an accent usually is not placed. 4, to examine the accent to indicate the syllable to be stressed. 5, to examine the accent to indicate punctuation marks. 6, to examine the accent to indicate musical signs. Specific objectives. 1, at the end of this lesson, the students will have identified the 2 syllables of a word which may take an accent. 2, at the end of this lesson, the students will have identified the syllable of a word which usually takes an accent. 3, at the end of this lesson, the students will have identified the symbol of the accent when it is placed on the syllable that is immediately before the last syllable. 4, at the end of this lesson, the students will have identified 3 uses of accents. Now, the words that are in red indicate my addition to the lesson on accents. It is put there so that you can see I have added information to make the lesson clearer than before. I've also put in some scanned information at the bottom to illustrate the points that are in the red. Now, the first point is accents are mostly placed on the last syllable of a word. It happens so often that in Hebrew grammars, no symbol of the accent is put on the last syllable of a word. I will be illustrating this in the next few minutes. This last syllable is any syllable that comes at the end of a word. If a word has 1 syllable, this is counted as the last syllable. So in the example below, 1 syllable word is counted as the last syllable. Now here is a one-syllable word, Rav. Resh, Pathak, Beth. Rav. In English, R-A-V, Rav, which means many or much in the English translation. Notice that there is no accent symbol, but it is understood that this syllable, which is the only syllable that there is, for it is the word, is the one that has the accent, but there is no syllable that is put there because, as I said here, accents are mostly placed on the last syllable. And it happens so often that in Hebrew grammars, no symbol of the accent is put on the last syllable of a word. So you may ask, how is it that you say that the last syllable is usually accented and I don't see any symbol of the accent on the last syllable of a word? Well, that's my point, that in Hebrew it happens so often. It is the rule rather than the exception that you know that the last syllable is to have an accent, that there is no need, the Hebrews say, for us to put a symbol representing the accent. Okay, so this one syllable word, Rav, shows us that there is no accent symbol there, but it still has the accent. The next word is the letters Sin, Pathak, and Resh, Sar. And in English translation, that is official or leader. Notice again, there is no accent mark because this is the only syllable and it is counted as the last syllable, and there is no need to put an accent symbol there because that is where the accent normally is put. And the next word consists of the letters Yoth, Kames, and Mem, Yam, and that means sea. Notice again, there is no accent symbol. It is the only syllable, it is the last syllable, and usually the accent comes on the last syllable, and it happens so often you don't need to put an accent symbol to remind the reader to accent that syllable. Let me illustrate further by a two-syllable word, a word that has two syllables. If a word has two syllables, the second syllable is the last syllable. So let us look at these words. The first syllable is na, and the second syllable is v. V. Notice again, you have two syllables, but you don't see any accent symbol because the Hebrews know it is on this syllable, the last syllable, that the accent should be placed. So we won't have to put any accent mark there. Now, B means prophet. Another two-syllable word is makom. Mem, kames, kof, kolem, mem. Makom, which means place. Ma is one syllable. Kom is the second syllable. It is also the last syllable. Notice again, there is no accent that is placed on this syllable because that is where the accent normally is placed. So there is no need to put a mark representing the accent there. Here is another word, olam, ayin, kolem, lameth, kames, mem, olam, means a long time or all time. Now, the first syllable is ayin and kolem. That's O. And the second syllable is lam. Notice there is no accent mark there to indicate that this syllable should be accented. There is no need to do that because normally the last syllable, which is this one, needs to get the accent. So if a word has two syllables, the second syllable is the last syllable. Moving on further to illustrate the same point. If a word has three syllables, then the third syllable is the last syllable.
Sir,
Yes.
I have a question, sir.
Yes.
Like maximum, how many syllable a word, well, a Igbo word should have? Maximum.
Okay. I have seen a word that has four syllables, but I'm not sure if that is the maximum. At any rate, what I have noticed is that most of the Hebrew words have two syllables. That seems to be the normal amount of syllables in a word. 3 syllables and 4 syllables are not easy to find. So 2 syllables is the normal amount. But why I'm going through this, Solin, is to let you understand you cannot just put down that the last syllable is the second syllable or the last syllable is the third syllable. The last syllable depends on the number of syllables in any given word. So if in a word you have 4 syllables, what would be the last syllable?
The fourth one.
The fourth one. In a word that has 3 syllables, what would be the last syllable?
The third one, sir.
That's right. In a word that has 2 syllables, what would be the last one?
The second one.
That is correct. So that is the way I think you have to learn it. You have to learn it like that, that depending on the number of syllables, you know that the last syllable will be the very last one, regardless of whether there is 1 syllable in a word, or 2 syllables in a word, or 3 or 4 syllables. The accent goes on the last syllable.
All right.
Now in this case, we have a 3-syllable word. Let me get my arrow here. It is she, that's 1 syllable. Li, that's the 2nd syllable. And she, which is the 3rd syllable. So it's a 3-syllable word. She, li, she. Sheli, she. And that means 3. It is the number 3. Notice again, there is no accent that is represented. There is no mark that says here is where the accent should be, because normally the accent should be on the last syllable. So there is no need to put an accent mark to indicate that this is the syllable to be accented. Here is another 3-syllable word. It is, let me try and find the arrow. It is ko, that's 1 syllable. Ha, 2nd syllable. Neem, the 3rd syllable. Ko, ha, neem, a 3-syllable word. Notice you do not see any accent symbol there, because it is taken for granted, it is understood that the last syllable, neem, is to receive the accent, even though the symbol is not there. Okay, so number 1 is The last syllable is the one that usually takes an accent. Now I move on to number 2. If it is referring to an accent. If it is placed on the syllable before the last syllable, it is indicated by the arrowhead symbol in the Hebrew grammars. And the reason for that is the accent is not in the usual place. The usual place for the accent is the last syllable, not the syllable before the last syllable, but the last syllable. And since the accent is not going to be in the usual place, then the reader has to be alerted by this accent mark that in this word, you're not going to put the accent or the stress on the last syllable. It is now going to be on the syllable immediately before the last syllable. And this is why you need to have the symbol of the accent in this case, because now the accent is going to be put on a syllable where it is not normally put. It is normally put on the last syllable, but since in this particular word, it is going to be on the syllable before the last syllable, then it needs the symbol of the accent to let you know I'm now going to put the stress on a different syllable from the last syllable. That is the syllable before the last syllable. Let us look at some examples of this. Okay. Examples of the symbol of the accent being placed on the syllable next to the last syllable. The last syllable in a word is so often accented that in Hebrew grammars, there is no symbol for the accent on this syllable. It is when the accent is placed on the syllable next to the last syllable that Hebrew grammars use the symbol for the accent. So here are some examples. This is the syllable immediately before the last syllable. It's a 2-syllable word. E is 1 syllable. Res is the 2nd syllable. Res is the last syllable. Normally, we would think that the accent would be on res. But because it's not on res, but it is on the first syllable, e, then there has to be an accent mark to let you know. Don't emphasize the last syllable, emphasize the syllable before the last syllable. So eres, not eres, but eres, which means land or the earth. Eres, the accent is placed on the syllable before the last syllable. It wasn't needed for the last syllable, but it is now needed because the accent is on a different syllable from where it normally is put. Here is another example, and it is the word derek. Now notice that the accent is on the syllable before the last syllable. The last syllable in derek is the syllable rek. And because the accent is not on the last syllable rek, but it is on the syllable before the last syllable, where it is not usually placed, you have to indicate to the reader that in this word derek, you're going to emphasize the syllable before the last syllable, which is de. The next example is melek. This is another 2-syllable word. Notice that me is the first syllable and lek is the 2nd syllable. Notice also that ordinarily the last syllable would be accented, but it is not accented in melech. The syllable that is accented in melech is not the last syllable, but it is the syllable immediately before the last syllable. That syllable is me, melech, not melech, but melech. And therefore you need the accent symbol to let you know that me must be emphasized. The next example is nefesh, or melech means king, and derek means way. Nefesh, notice again, ne is one syllable, fesh is the second syllable. Fesh is also the last syllable. Fesh would normally be the syllable that is accented in another word. But in this particular word, nefesh, it is not accented. And to let the reader know that he or she is not so supposed to emphasize fesh, but emphasize the syllable before the last syllable, which is ne, the accent mark has to be put on the syllable before the last syllable. And the next example is, or nefesh means breath, soul, life, person. The next example is eveth. Eveth. It's a two-syllable word. Now notice that e is the first syllable, beth is the second syllable. But notice that the second syllable, which is the last syllable of the word, is not accented. It is the syllable before the last syllable that has the accent. And because that's not the usual place where the accent is put, it has to be indicated by the arrowhead over that syllable which is before the last syllable. Hence the arrowhead over ayin, the consonant ayin. Eveth means servant, slave, or worshiper. So no accent mark is put over the last syllable, though the last syllable usually takes the accent. You only need the accent mark in Hebrew grammars, that is, when another syllable than the last syllable gets the accent. To let the reader know in this particular word, make sure that you emphasize the syllable that is immediately before the last syllable. To sum it up thus far, there are 2 points you need to remember. Number one, the last syllable usually is accented, so it doesn't need any accent symbol like an arrowhead. Number two, the syllable before the last syllable is the only other syllable in a word that can be accented. And although it is usually not accented, if it is accented any at all, that is the only remaining syllable of a word that can get an accent. The syllable can't go, the accent cannot go anywhere else. It is either on the last syllable or on the syllable that is immediately before the last syllable. Any other syllable in the word cannot get an accent. So there are just 2 places that can get an accent: the last syllable or the syllable before the last syllable. And in this example, I've shown you different words that have the syllable before the last syllable getting an accent. And because it's not the usual thing, you have to indicate that this is to be done by having the arrowhead symbol above that syllable that is to be emphasized or stressed. Before I move on, is there any question that you want to ask? Anybody?
No, sir.
Okay, let's move on.
Thank you, guys.
Solin, you have a question?
Well, I was just saying that you can move on.
All right. So we're moving on
Yes,
to
sir.
point 3. The second syllable from the last syllable is never accented. The second syllable from the last syllable is never accented. Now, let me just make this clear. Not all Hebrew words have enough syllables that you could actually find a second syllable from the last syllable. Most of the Hebrew words have 2 syllables only, and so there is not a third syllable that you could call the second syllable from the last syllable. I had to look carefully in a vocabulary Hebrew book to find examples on this screen to illustrate the point. So let us look at these examples. Now let us see how many syllables are in this word. This is a long word in Hebrew. This is 1 syllable, that's R. This is another syllable, ba. And this is the third syllable, ah. So together it is arba'ah, 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 which means 4. It's the number 4. Arba'ah, 4. Now let us find the last syllable. That's the first thing we need to do after we know how many syllables are here. 1, 2, 3, 3 syllables. Let's find the last syllable. The last syllable is this. Ayin, kames, he. Ah, that's the last syllable. Now the rule here says the second syllable from the last syllable is never accented. So let us count. Since this is the last syllable, let us start counting from the syllable immediately before the last syllable. 1, and then 2. This is the second syllable from the last syllable. The last syllable is here, and the first syllable from the last syllable is ba, and the second syllable from the last syllable is r, which means that in this word of 3 syllables, r cannot be accented. Under no circumstance can this syllable, which is 2 syllables away from the last syllable, be accented. So this syllable which I've circled is the second syllable away from the last syllable, which cannot get an accent according to the Hebrew grammar. The second syllable from the last syllable is never accented. The circle represents never accented. It can never be accented. So if you're given a word and you're told to accent it, bear in mind that if there is a 3-syllable word, 1, 2, 3, that the syllable that is 2 syllables away from the last syllable, which is this one, can never get an accent. Here is another illustration, and it is the word kamisha, 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 which means 5. Well, let us find the last syllable. The last syllable is sha. That's it. Shin, kames, he. That's the last syllable. So what is the first syllable away from the last syllable? It is mi. Mem, kirik, short kirik, mi. And what is the second syllable away from the last syllable? It is ka. So this syllable, which is 2 syllables away from the last syllable, can never get an accent. Here is another word, milkama. 1, 2, 3, 3 syllables, which means fight or battle. Fight or battle. Let's find the last syllable. What's the last syllable in this word here?
Ma.
Ma.
Ma, you're correct, ma. Mem, kames, and he. That's the last syllable. So if the second syllable from the last syllable is never accented, let's start to count from away from the last syllable. This is the last syllable, so I won't include it. The first syllable from the last syllable is ka, and the second syllable away from the last syllable is mil. Mil. So this syllable, which is the second syllable from the last syllable, is never accented. Yes, Solin.
Yes, sir. Can we say that it is the first syllable?
Can we say that it is what?
The
But
first
the word-
syllable, sir.
If there are how many syllables?
Yes, sir.
No, sir. He was asking if we can say that the first syllable, sir. Can I get the accent?
Okay, that would be correct for these examples. That would be correct for these examples. But I would not recommend that you write it like that, since words have different amounts or different numbers of syllables. Okay, so if you have a 2-syllable word, then it would not work. A 2-syllable word is a word that the accent could go on the last syllable as well as the syllable before the last syllable. The only way that can work is if you have a 3-syllable word. Okay, so I would advise you not to write it like that. How I would recommend that you write it is that it is the second syllable from the last syllable. If you write it like that, it doesn't matter how many syllables the word has. You can never go wrong with that answer. That you count 2 syllables away from the last syllable, and that will give you the correct answer. Okay, but for purposes of what you have asked, these would be examples in which the first syllable in the word is the syllable that does not get the accent. But that does not always work, because in a syllable, in a case like over here, in which you have 2 syllables, res. You couldn't say that the first syllable cannot get the accent. It's not even 2 syllables away from the last syllable. This is the last syllable, and this is the syllable immediately before the last syllable. So if you were to say that the first syllable should not be accented, that would apply over here, because these are 3-syllable words. But it wouldn't apply to 2-syllable words. You can see that all these 2-syllable words have an accent on the syllable that is the first syllable of the word. E, de, me, ne, e. They're all first-syllable words. So the best thing to do is to give an answer like this in the red. The second syllable from the last syllable is never accented. You will not go wrong if you answer it like this. Okay, so you have milkama. Notice that 2 syllables from the last syllable, 1, 2, is mil, and this does not get the accent. Sevaoth, Sevaoth, which means host or army. Notice that oath is the last syllable, Ba is the first syllable away from the last syllable, and se is the second syllable away from the last syllable, and so it does not get an accent. So this rule is the second syllable from the last syllable is never accented. So to put it simply, there are only two syllables in any word that can get an accent in Hebrew: the last syllable and the syllable immediately before the last syllable. No other syllable, no matter how long the word is, no other syllable can be accented. Okay, so that's it. Just two syllables in a word can be accented. Either the last syllable or the syllable immediately before the last syllable. Any other question or comment before I move on?
No, sir.
Okay,
No, sir.
let us move on to the next one. Rule number 4. In the Hebrew Bible itself, accents have many different shapes. I must tell you, when I was first learning Hebrew, and before I had even opened up the Hebrew Bible itself, I thought that because the accent mark in the Hebrew grammar book that I was using was in the shape of an arrowhead, that I would find that same accent symbol in the Hebrew Bible itself. And I looked for it and I couldn't find it. But I think this was just a way of simplifying the learning of Hebrew, to have one symbol for the accent. Because when you look into the Hebrew Bible, there are many different shapes for different accents. So the writers of the Hebrew grammar have tried to simplify the learning of the language by having one symbol for the accent, and by not using that symbol on the last syllable of the word. So, number 1, in the Hebrew grammars, the arrowhead symbol is the standard symbol of the accent whenever the accent is to be placed on the syllable next to the last syllable. Number 2, also in the Hebrew grammars, no symbol of the accent is placed on the last syllable, since the accent is mostly placed on the last syllable, and the Hebrew-speaking people know that they are to accent the last syllable. Number 3, however, in the Hebrew Bible, there is not just one shape for the symbol of the accent, but there are many different shapes. Number 4, furthermore, in the Hebrew Bible, different shaped symbols of the accent are regularly placed on the last syllable of different Hebrew words, as will be illustrated in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1 in the Hebrew Bible in the next slide. I don't want you to be confused. You have to separate what is written in the Hebrew grammar from what is written in the Hebrew Bible. The Hebrew grammar is difficult as it is to understand, and they have tried to make the learning of the language as simple as possible by having one symbol for the accent, and by not putting the symbol of the accent on the last syllable. But in the Hebrew Bible itself, there are many different shapes for the accent, and you find that there are different shaped accents that are put on the last syllable of a word. It sounds like a contradiction, but it is the difference between how Hebrew is presented to those who are beginning to learn the language and how it is actually presented in the Hebrew Bible. I'm going to illustrate that now. Number 5, note that in the first 3 words of the first line, a different accent symbol is placed on the last syllable. Let me deal with that first. Note that in the first 3 words of the first line, a different accent symbol is placed on the last syllable. So let us look. These are the first 3 words. Bereshith, bara, Elohim. 1, 2, 3. 3 words. Now here are the different shapes of the accents. Here is one of the shapes where the arrow is pointing. Here is another shape where the arrow is pointing, and another shape. In each word, there was a different shape. Each of them represents an accent. And notice which syllable they are placed in. This is a word that has 3 syllables. You have be, re, this is the syllable re, and this is the last syllable sheath, 3 syllables. And the accent mark is placed here, and sheath is the last syllable. I just finished telling you that the accent mark is not placed in the last syllable. It is understood that it is to be accented. And now I'm showing you in the Hebrew Bible, there is actually an accent mark placed in the last syllable. Well, what is going on? It's a difference between the Hebrew grammar and the Hebrew Bible. And so, in actual fact, in the Hebrew Bible, there are accent marks placed on the last syllable. However, it is still true that the last syllable is the syllable that is accented most of the time. And so those that write the Hebrew grammars try to simplify it for us by not having any accent mark placed on the last syllable. Only on a syllable next to the last syllable, you would find it in the Hebrew grammar. But in the Bible itself, there are different shapes for the symbol. And in the first 3 words of Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, Bereshith, bara, Elohim, on each of the last syllables of these words, you have different accent marks, indicating that the last syllable of each word is to be stressed or emphasized. Bereshith, bara, Elohim. Okay, so note that in the first 3 words of the first line, a different accent symbol is placed on the last syllable. Sheath, ra, him. Those are the last syllables of each word. Note also that in the second line, that is this line here, in the second line, a different accent symbol is placed on the syllable next to the last syllable in 2 long words. These are the long words I'm talking about. Hashamayim. Let's see how many syllables we have here. Hash, sha, that's second. Ma is third. Im is fourth. 4 syllables in this word. Here's another word, haaretz. Haaretz. Ha is 1 syllable, a is the second, res is the third, 3-syllable word. Now in each of these 2 long words, there is an accent mark on the syllable that is immediately before the last syllable. Ma is the syllable immediately before the last syllable, im. And a has an accent mark here, and it is on the syllable that is immediately before the last syllable. So in these 2 long words, you have accent marks on the syllable before the last syllable. I'm going to come to these words here. These words are 1-syllable words. I didn't ask you about them on the test. I think I better show you about them. They also have accent marks. Here's an accent mark with eighth, a 1-syllable word. Another the same accent mark with this one word here, one syllable word. This is counted as the last syllable. It's just one syllable, and the accent mark is there. Okay, so it's a one syllable word, and it's counted as the last syllable. The accent is there. So here we find the accents on the last syllable and on the syllable before the last syllable, and in these short words on the last syllable. So note that in the second line, a different accent symbol is placed on the syllable next to the last syllable in two long words. Now let us look more closely at accents, especially three uses of accents. They serve A, to indicate the syllable to be stressed in pronunciation. For example, in the first three words of Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, the last syllable is to be stressed. Sheath, ra, him. These are the last syllables. But in Hashemayim and in Haares, the accent is on the second to the last syllable. So they indicate the syllable to be stressed in pronunciation. That's one use of the accent. Three uses in all, but this is one use, to indicate the syllable to be stressed in pronunciation. Here is the syllable to be stressed. The accent is there to tell you that. The last syllable. Again, the last syllable is to be stressed. Here is the accent mark. Again, the last syllable is to be stressed. Here is the accent mark. The second to the last syllable is to be stressed. Here is the accent mark. The second to the last syllable is to be stressed. Here is the accent mark. The only syllable that is in this word is to be stressed. The only syllable that is in this word is to be stressed. So it indicates the syllable to be stressed in pronunciation. So that's the first use of the accent. The second use of the accent is as punctuation marks. That is, they divide the verse into its logical parts. Two major punctuation marks are a vertical line to the left of the vowel called siluk, which always appear under the last word of a verse. Always appear under the last word of a verse, as under haares. Here is the vertical line to the left of the vowel kames, the long ah sound, at the end of Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. The siluk, that's the siluk, is the greatest stop in a verse and is followed by the sign that has two diamond-shaped dots, one above the other, called in Hebrew sof pasuk, which means in English, end of verse. Then another punctuation mark is the athnak, that looks like a semicircle with a little projection at the top in the center of the semicircle. This athnak is under the second word, is under the word Elohim, and it's in the last syllable of Elohim in Genesis 1, verse 1, and it is said to be the second greatest stop and divides the verse into two logical parts. And so you have, let me go back to this. Here is the first part of the verse. Bereshith bara Elohim, and you have the athnak. This is the first half of the verse, logically divided. In the beginning, God created. And then in the second line, you have what God created. Hashemayim haaretz, the heavens, the earth. And so it logically divides the verse. The athnak therefore tells you this is the first part of the verse. And when you start on the other line, you know it's the second part of the verse. So it acts as punctuation marks. Now there is another use of the accent. The accent is also used as musical signs for chanting the scriptures in the synagogues. I believe that one reason there are so many different shapes for the symbols of the accent is that they are used to represent different musical notes. Just as in the English language, in music, there are different shaped notes to represent different musical sounds. I'm going to reposition the video so you can see this hymn. Now, this is a hymn in one of our hymn books. It is not used much by the churches today, but was in great use back in the 1970s. It's called Great Songs of the Church. And in number 15, there is an ancient chant that is based on Matthew chapter 7, verses 7 and 8. Now you may ask, what is a chant? A chant is a kind of singing in which there is hardly any differences between the notes. It's unlike modern songs in which there are many differences between the notes. But in a chant, you have a very simple hymn with hardly any variation or differences between the notes. I use this as an example because in the synagogues, the spiritual leader or the rabbi will chant the scriptures. And the accents that are in the Hebrew Bible tell him what is the note that he should use with a particular word. And this is why you have him able to sing it into a particular tune. So let us pretend this is what's happening here. These are words taken from Matthew chapter 7, verses 7 and 8. And all of this line, ask and it shall be given unto you, is in the note of do. The triangle at the top represents the sound do. Then seek and ye shall find is in a higher note, re. Then these words, knock and it shall be open unto you, is back to the original note, do. And then the closing words, saith the Lord, is in three notes, la, ti, do. And it goes like this. This is how a chant sounds. Ask and it shall be given unto you. Seek and ye shall find. Knock and it shall be opened unto you, saith the Lord. For everyone that asketh receiveth, and he that seeketh findeth, and to him that knocketh it shall be opened, saith the Lord. So this is an ancient Christian chant. The early Christians used simple music and they called it chanting. This is an ancient Christian chant. And so in the Hebrew Bible, those different shaped notes that we see here also represent musical notes that the person who is leading the congregation in chanting will sing the scriptures. They don't just read the scriptures, but they chant or sing the scriptures, just like I did with Matthew chapter 7, verses 7 and 8. So three uses of the accent. Number one, it is used to indicate the syllable to be stressed in pronunciation. Number two, let me get the video there. Number 2, it is used as punctuation marks. And number 3, it is used as musical signs for chanting the scriptures in the synagogues. Do you have any question on this?
No, sir.
No, sir. Read down.
Sir,
Okay,
sir,
yes, go
sir.
ahead.
It's not a question, but I think where the Rastafarian, they normally practice the chanting also.
Okay, all right. Any other comments or questions?
No, sir.
All right, then. Have a good weekend.
Thank you very much, sir. Same to
And
you.
Lord's Day services.
Yes, sir.
All right.